think the most mined resource is? The most mined resource. So like a mineral, is it gold? What do you think?
Oh, mind resource.
MINED.
Mind resource. I think that, let's see, aluminum is one, iron is another, copper is another.
Oh yeah, copper's become quite an item.
And I know that there is somewhat of a battle happening over lithium.
Yeah, the new era, huh? Remember when pennies were made of copper because it was such a common resource?
And now it's not.
No,
No.
so the lithium and the copper have become kind of scarce in comparison to how readily available it used to be. I think those are amazing, guesses. It's sand. Sand accounts for about 85% of all mineral extraction worldwide.
They're manufactured mostly for glass, which I think, I mean, not just for windows and things of that nature, but maybe even for tech, for parts.
Yeah, I was curious about that too, because silica and silicon being so important in technology, but largely the sand that's being mined is for construction sand, which yes, is used in glass. It's also one of the main ingredients in concrete. It's used in fracking, and it's also, really largely utilized in land reclamation as well.
Mm-hmm.
The United Nations Environmental Program estimates that 40 billion tons of sand are mined annually, but those are only the numbers that they know of. And it's recognized that there are all these numbers that go unmonitored because it is a largely even unmonitored enterprise. So construction sand is mined rather than just scooped up out in the desert because it's more angular, and desert sand is kind of rounded off from wind erosion. And so it doesn't bond really well.
The little granules of sand are more angular, and it can stick better.
Yes.
If mined sand as opposed to just ocean sand or desert
well, no,
sand.
Ocean sand is a different topic actually than desert
really?
sand. But I just wanted to let you know that we're not like going out into the desert and going, oh, finally something we can do with all of this, wasteland.
Right.
Because it bonds so poorly. So sand for construction sand, so construction sand it's mined via mostly pit mining, but it's also mined from freshwater beds and even from the ocean. But the thing is when it's mined from ocean sand, it has to be processed and cleaned of the salt because it's not, you can't utilize it in those items that we previously mentioned if it contains a heavy salt amount. So it has to be more processed if it's coming out of the ocean, but we're still totally mining the ocean for it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say we, I mean worldwide, everybody.
Right. Humans.
So yeah, when I found this out, I had no idea. 85% of mining operations, like, it's for sand.
What is that huge hole in the earth? What are they doing over there? Mining for sand.
We're just looking for sand. Yeah, it makes me feel like a lot less innocent about those little plastic pits we had for toddlers, the little turtle pits, little sand pits.
I do.
Not so innocent an item anymore. So yeah, what was it? I have numbers on the amount of sand it takes. It's 6 to 7 tons of sand and gravel for every 1 ton of concrete.
That's a lot.
6 to 7 tons of sand and gravel for every 1 ton of concrete. And we use a lot of concrete worldwide. All growing nations and cities are using concrete for really important things, that we, I think, take for granted. Granite. I think we take it for granted.
I'm trying to visualize what a ton of concrete looks like. And the first thing that comes to mind are those, if there's some kind of construction going on, let's say on a highway, and they have to create a barrier in order to keep the traffic flow very specific in a lane. And so you have these concrete barriers. And I wonder how much one of those weighs.
They weigh so much.
I wonder if it's a ton of concrete.
And then is it a metric ton or is this an imperial ton? But okay. The thing is we're also using that construction sand in the asphalt. It's not just the concrete. So not only is the road using that sand, but those dividers are using the sand. Foundations of houses are using that sand. And then, like some at-home art projects were using concrete, for some molds and sculptures and things like that. Well, recycled building rubble can be used to make concrete. Recycled glass can be used to make, like a lot of those items. I'm not saying universally that all of these materials are great for one. They're less good for one and more good for another, but recycled building rubble, recycled glass, ash from power station incinerators, and then even dust from rock quarries can often be substituted in there instead of using mined sand. But there's really little initiative to do that and go about things that way because of how inexpensive mined sand is. And it's largely unregulated. So mining is really cheap in comparison to doing all these recycling options as far as dollars and cents, but not as far as morals and good sense. Because it's really disturbing not only ecosystems to mine, especially in waterways, but it's affecting a lot of people in a way that I thought was unimaginable. Like I was just so ignorant or naive to any of this happening. But what's happening is basically growing nations are eating up all of these sand-based resources, especially concrete. Concrete just comes to mind as being like, concrete and glass buildings, like in cities. That's all you see is glass and concrete buildings. And so all of this construction sand going into these upscale, up and coming rebuilds and urban rebuilds and things like that. But the sand is often coming from areas that are less affluent. And sand mining lacks any global treaties governing its extraction. So plenty of violence has broken out between guerrilla sand mining factions in these less affluent areas. There's even a sand mining mafia in India. If you think about this is one of the things that I think is the most visually alarming. If you're just hearing the words and not finding articles with photo evidence and things like that, it's really hard to feel in touch with exactly how much this can affect an environment, right? But whole islands have been demolished, claiming the sand literally to build a different island, taking apart an island to build an island someplace else.
When you're growing up in an area or living along the shore and you see just how pliable and maneuverable sand can be, where shorelines can be completely changed in like a matter of months. Just give it a hard hurricane. So to collect sand and to move sand elsewhere. But would they have to, in rebuilding this new island, would they have to somehow manipulate the sand and add something to it to make it stronger? I wonder.
Yeah, I don't know the details about constructing a synthetic island. It's not like when you have a whole house, there are services where like you can just have your house moved on a truck in parts, move it from one area to another. That's not quite how that works with islands. So as far as pressure and tamping and additives, and I don't know.
I was just thinking about concrete, and I think it was the ancient Romans invented concrete.
That it was a different composition. It did degrade differently than modern concrete.
And then the recipe for concrete was lost for like an 800-year period. And then it was somehow reinvented again. What movie is it? What is it? Ben-Hur or it's one of those biblical epic films where Charlton Heston is being whipped as he's standing there and he is basically making concrete and they keep throwing hay into it. I think that was part of the early recipes of concrete. And just make it sand and water and hay.
And ash, I think. Yeah, I think like lye or pure ash was added. Concrete and cement through the ages. They weren't making whole ton batches, I don't think, at that point with the straw, if I had to guess. What were they mixing it in? It was all hand mixed. They didn't have turners, and
they would kind of like dig out a hole, make like a pool, fill it with water and the sand and whatever else. And they would just kind of stomp on it like they're stomping on grapes.
But that's dangerous. So I want to circle back to these less affluent areas. Riverbeds is one of the most highly mined areas. If it's not pit mining, freshwater beds of sand are the next in line. That's an entire ecosystem. And also a lot of villages, they're near water. And so if a guerrilla operation comes in and starts dredging and removing sand, it undermines the stability of the riverside. Fishing, especially for these villages that rely on fishing, that's why the villages, largely are there, is for the nutrition of the soil and the fact that they can fish for food. And the fish populaces either go away or they die. And so the fishing then decreases. So mining in this way creates a damage to human food as well as wild animal food. I do just want to add, to be clear, that riverbeds can sustainably have sand extraction, and it can be sustainable because it'll resediment. But there are natural limits for the health and integrity of the riverbed. And that does need to be maintained if it's going to be a healthy waterway and uphold life and uphold a village built directly next door to it. And the thing is they're decimating ecosystems with this kind of renegade style mining. There have been instances where villages have actually attacked and toppled equipment, and it's so unregulated that it becomes a very local affair. If there is regulation, often it is left up to local authorities, which has led to some authorities trying to put a stop to operations beginning, and they've been run over by equipment because they physically stood in the way saying you can't do this. And then they were just run over because it's a money-making operation. A real estate tycoon can secure their financial well-being by mining parks and wetlands, even if it's illegal, even if there is any regulation. They find their way in bribing or just going under the radar, because there isn't enough of those agents of authority to keep them out. If a person has money at their disposal to push into an area to get more money, that's a resource that begets more resources. In some instances, it really is just like a pickup truck with a back full of sand. But, when you're moving an island, so much money goes into that. So there are equally tiny operations and then huge, huge, huge operations. It's really like a full spectrum. But one of the things being clear is that it's an opportunistic kind of money-based enterprise, because there are other options, but they aren't options for less affluent areas. The peoples of those areas have a raw resource that they can tap into to make money. They can't open a plant to recycle glass. That's not an option. That's something where it's like you have to have money and resources to make that option a possibility, to make it a more sustainable enterprise. And so if it's just a raw resource that somebody with a pickup truck can make some money, that's one way of really thinking about what a pinch a person could be in and what they're able or willing to do or forced to do.
It makes you think about a lot of different things, because thinking of that one individual who is looking to make some money and will somehow allocate some sand and put it in the back of his truck and offer it up to sell it to somebody. And maybe as he's going about getting this sand, he's putting himself at risk. He's putting the environment at risk, and perhaps some aspect of a riverbed, which is something that a local village uses for whatever purpose, at risk. And that's just on a small scale.
Yeah, that's on a very immediate scale. And it is risky because in some scenarios, if you go in trying to get sand from an area and somebody else is looking for that money, and you've got the tiniest operation, you're one person behind a steering wheel shoveling, then
right,
if someone else with even just a few more people comes in, that puts that person at physical risk. And if it's not that scenario and that person's not at risk of other factions trying to mine the same area, then sometimes they're just taking a truck out into reserves and mining in a way that, again, isn't healthy for that person, not surveying the area. How safe is it to go mine an area where you have no knowledge of what the land is like?
Because it's difficult getting the sand, it could also mean that you can sell it for a decent price.
I think I would imagine that because it has been so cheap, that there isn't a lot of bargaining power. I think since it's such an accessible resource still, I think that has made the risks of it and the environmental impact of it not really hit most of our radars. That goes for a lot of topics. We weren't recording when I mentioned this, but a lot of individuals don't go to the doctor until like an eye is falling out or like there's a lot of blood. And for as many people like that as there are just as many people that go in if they have some dry skin. But to get attention from an outside source, to get some kind of media, to be able to have solid conversation about things, often the symptoms have to be pretty big. How much does a ton of construction sand cost? $5 to $30 per ton. I'm assuming that's retail. Okay. Well, then how much did the person who had a ton of that sand and brought it to some dubious location, what did they get paid? Did they get like $1? What does that dollar pan out to in a person's life? And then so that opens like a whole new sphere of what someone's willing to do for $1. And what does that mean in the significance of contemplating that person's access to food, safety, education, water, sand?
When I used to work in Midtown Manhattan, and you spend your nights off just kind of wandering the city, and you find yourself in Lower Manhattan, and there's something about the concrete in the street and the sidewalks that at night when you're just looking around and you see this sparkle of the street and of the sidewalks, and I haven't seen anything like it. And that really stood out to me. It's beautiful. The city, parts of the city are beautiful at night.
Did you say it was Lower Manhattan?
Yeah, East of Fifth is east, and it's like mostly along Fifth Avenue. Why do the streets of New York City sparkle? Magic in the mundane.
Ooh.
Somebody wrote an article on this. So this person is actually trying to figure out why it sparkles, and they couldn't find an answer. And so they had to, Google didn't have the answers, but it did help me find my way to New York City DOT. After a few confused phone calls with operators, I finally got through to Maurice. He told me that it was the inclusion of mica topically embedded in the sidewalks, which made them shine. Mica is mined mineral that is part of a group of silicates, and it goes on and talks about that. So sparkly sidewalks are called tinted sidewalks.
So this was an aesthetic choice that was made when the city had the sidewalks made?
This is beyond the aesthetic reasons. Similar shiny aggregates help to keep sidewalks clean, allowing rain to more easily slide off the concrete. I never really gave it some thought as to why it is what it is. But now, after discussing this a little bit, you kind of have this idea of there's quite a process involved in getting that much material, that much of a resource together in order to create some kind of infrastructure. And people are putting their lives at risk in order to gather some of that and sell it somehow, maybe in somebody else's territory where they shouldn't be. People are competing against one another in order to find the best spot to get the best sand. And then I think of parts of Dubai where the coastline has been manipulated in such a way where it makes you wonder, how on earth did they do that?
I think that the flavor that I'm left with, that bitter flavor in my mouth, is that I feel obligated to consider the catalyst for the way this business is functioning. How exploitative is it of people, of the environment? How much damage could it possibly be doing to ecosystems? And it's a concern. I think one of the most income earning economies is construction. These huge projects, even if it's just a roadway project, even if it's just a bridge project, you have to be highly educated to manage these things. Meanwhile, people that are supplying the sand are potentially some of the least educated people due to lack of accessibility. And so there's a huge amount of disparity just in that facet of this topic. And so then it becomes a question of like, well, whose responsibility is it to remediate, I mean, physically, but also remediate the whole human situation that's involved there, that there's such a disparity of, I used the word tycoon earlier, but real estate tycoons literally permissed to remove islands, to build their own private island, to make communities that will continue to give them money. And that these people who are supplying the resources to create that city, never earning enough money to reside within those cities, like that makes my head spin. almost literally. I'm gonna have to hold it on there. It's very jarring to just open up that can and be like, wow, that's a lot. That's exploitative. So that is a repeating pattern with a lot of topics that I have started to do research on, is that inevitably things just aren't as simple as we think they are. And not only is it, frogs and fish that are at risk, but
Right.
the physical well-being, the mental well-being, and the cultural well-being of people and individuals is also at risk for something as simple as a truck bed full of sand.
It's very corrupt. There's so many, I think, facets of it that are abrasive. These are all really important things to talk about, just because you're forced to really think.
I think critical thinking it's imperative. Everybody's capacity to be able to critically think about things is going to be different at any given moment, and that's human. We have to be able to forgive ourselves a certain amount of that, but it does not excuse an aversion of the eye and an utter laziness to developing better knowledge, better understanding, and a better response. These aren't things that I knew about before. Anything that we're going to talk about, I didn't know, months ago, most likely. And so I'm really just fresh to these findings. And do I have all the answers? No. No one human being would I ever expect to have the answer with anything I would ever ask of them, but the conversations, the communication, and the active listening are imperative.
It's interesting because when you're presented with information and you're not familiar with it, but you're familiar with something, it's almost as if you have to give yourself a chance to just really listen and take it in and think about it and see what your own life experience and your own knowledge base comes up with. It could come up short, or there might be something there. But no matter what, just the exercise of talking through new information, I think, is important.
Thanks for tuning in to By the Roots with hosts Nicole Berry and Corinne Meadors. Music by Mim Paquin.